Welcome to Study Time, a televised home learning program produced by Rwanda Basic Education Board.
Hello, Senior 3 Chemistry class. You're welcome for today's lesson. This is Unit 1 that we are continuing to learn. Today we are heading to Lesson 4, which is inorganic compounds of carbon. Inorganic compounds of what? Of carbon. You remember we are dealing with chemical properties of carbon, where we looked at the reactions of carbon with other elements or other substances. So for today, as I've said, we are looking at inorganic compounds of carbon. So what does it mean when we say inorganic compounds of carbon? So when we say inorganic compounds of carbon, normally carbon can exist, as we had learned in the introduction of the lesson, of the unit. We said carbon can exist as a free element, or it can exist in a combined form. All right? That is what we call inorganic compounds of carbon. Carbon existing in a combined form. You get me? So, students, get prepared with your pens, with your notebooks, as we in the lesson. You can keep writing whatever you feel is very important as we are studying here. So, the objective of the lesson today, you may ask yourself, what I have to put into consideration by the end of this lesson. So at the end of the lesson, every learner will be able to explain the chemical properties of carbon as we looked, and their properties. All right? And its compounds. So as we are going to look at the inorganic compounds of carbon, so at the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain the chemical properties of the inorganic compounds of carbon. All right? The inorganic compounds of carbon, their chemical properties. So we're going to start by looking at what are some of those inorganic compounds of carbon and their chemical properties. All right? So I think you're ready and we can start. Good. 1, as I said, inorganic compounds of carbon. Carbon exists as a free element or in a combined form. I said that. So those that are in a combined form, that's what we call the inorganic compounds of carbon. They include oxides of carbon, carbonates, and hydrogen carbonates. All right? So those are the combined or inorganic compounds of carbon. The oxides of carbon, carbonates, and hydrogen carbonates. So there we can find their carbon. So as I said, sometimes carbon exists as a free element, just single carbon, but it can also be found in combined form, like in oxides of carbon, carbonates, and hydrogen carbonates. All right? So we start by looking at one by one. Oxides of carbon. All right? Oxides of what? Oxides of carbon. Normally, the oxides of carbon are two. Those are carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. So we have been looking at these two oxides, where we said that carbon monoxide is formed when you react oxygen with carbon in limited oxygen. Oxygen should not be in excess. It should be limited oxygen. So when carbon reacts with oxygen in limited oxygen, we get carbon monoxide. All right? That is when carbon monoxide is formed. So carbon monoxide is a colorless and odorless gas. It's slightly denser than air. So carbon monoxide is produced by incomplete combustion. So when we say incomplete combustion, that's when there is limited oxygen. Then the combustion or the burning is not complete, which is the difference with carbon dioxide formation, where there is complete combustion, enough oxygen. So when we talk of carbon monoxide, it is a very poisonous gas. How do you know? So this carbon monoxide, in case it happens to react with hemoglobin, When you breathe, you happen to breathe like you put in a house, a small house, they introduce in carbon monoxide, all right? So the carbon monoxide that you breathe in will go and react with hemoglobin. What is hemoglobin? A red pigment. That is biology. You know, chemistry and biology, they are brothers and sisters. So when you react, that is biology part. When you react hemoglobin with carbon monoxide, you form what we call carboxyhemoglobin. So I was saying, what is hemoglobin? What is hemoglobin? Yeah, it is a red pigment found in blood. The red pigment. The reason why blood of a human being or blood of animals is red, it is the presence of what? Hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the one that gives blood to be with a red color. You know, like insects have got blood, they have blood, but blood of insect lack hemoglobin. That's why those white things you see when you like try to squeeze an insect, there are white things that comes out. That is blood of an insect, but it is not red. Why? It doesn't possess what we call hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is the red pigment that gives the blood that red color. Like we say for photosynthesis, I mean for green plants, that there is that green pigment we call chlorophyll that gives the plant to be with a green color. So the plants that don't have a green color, they lack chlorophyll. So the blood without hemoglobin shouldn't be, it is not red in color. So what is the role of that hemoglobin? Still biology part. The role of hemoglobin is to transport oxygen. So the it's the red blood cells that transports oxygen by the help of the hemoglobin. So as you breathe carbon monoxide, the carbon monoxide will go and react with hemoglobin in the red blood cells. Finally, we form what we call carboxyhemoglobin. So this carboxyhemoglobin will block the oxidation or the addition of oxygen on hemoglobin. So somebody will die of suffocation because of lack of oxygen. All right? So normally, in a normal way, oxygen has to react with hemoglobin, then transported by the red blood cells to the rest of the body where the oxygen is needed. So hemoglobin keeps on taking oxygen, offloading, taking oxygen where it is needed, then offloading it there. All right? So now case comes when instead of adding to oxygen, there is carbon monoxide forming carboxyhemoglobin instead of oxhemoglobin. All right? So it blocks oxygen from adding itself to hemoglobin and be transported. So somebody will lack oxygen and eventually will die or will suffocate. If suffocate, if it is something that takes a long time, that person dies. All right? So this carbon monoxide is very dangerous since it can lead to what? To that formation of carboxyhemoglobin, then finally an individual may die. So that is carbon monoxide. Another oxide of carbon is carbon dioxide, all right? Another, I said carbon has got two kinds of oxides. That is carbon monoxide that we have discussed, which is formed as a result of carbon reacting with limited oxygen. So when there is enough oxygen, all right? When carbon reacts with enough oxygen, we form, in this way, we form carbon dioxide. We had talked about that among the chemical properties or the reaction of carbon with oxygen in the chemical properties of oxygen, all right? So this is the carbon dioxide that is formed when there is what we call complete combustion. So carbon dioxide is a colorless and odorless gas. It is formed when fuels undergo what we call complete combustion, sufficient supply of oxygen, or air, in other words. So what else can we talk about carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide is used in photosynthesis. How? It's among the raw materials of photosynthesis. That is biology still. So when you asked, what are the raw materials for photosynthesis? Right? So carbon dioxide is there. You remember the equation of photosynthesis? This is carbon dioxide plus water with the help of, or with two conditions. That is for chlorophyll and sunlight to form carbohydrates and some energy. All right? So you see, carbon dioxide is among the raw materials of photosynthesis. All right? But when carbon dioxide is produced in large quantity, though it has, we have said it is very important in photosynthesis, but when it is produced in large quantity, no, since it is among the greenhouse gases, together with the nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide, when it is introduced in large amounts, as a result of human activities like motor vehicles emissions and burning of wastes, right? You can look at some of the man's activities that leads to production of carbon dioxide on the slide, please. These are some of the activities of man that produces carbon dioxide, all right? These are all the vehicles, see? Emission of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this is burning of wastes, like the tires, old tires, all right? What does it mean here? It means that if this carbon dioxide is emitted in the atmosphere in high amount, instead of being useful, as we said that it is used for photosynthesis, it becomes now harmful because it will lead to what we call global warming or greenhouse effect. Then that the destruction of the ozone layer, some strong layers will hit the Earth's surface. So it will lead to global warming. What is global warming? Geography. What is global warming? An increase in temperature, all right? Increase in temperature. Eventually, it will lead to climate changes, all right, like a drought and other changes, all right? So it is very dangerous when carbon dioxide is emitted in the atmosphere in high amount. That's why you're always advised to do what we call afforestation, planting of trees. When you cut one tree, you plant like 2 more trees. Why? Because these trees will trap the too much or the excess of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and use it for photosynthesis. That's the logic behind. When you plant too many trees, though there are some activities of man that are trying to emit carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that carbon dioxide that is being emitted in the atmosphere will be trapped by these green plants to use it for photosynthesis. As we have said, carbon dioxide is used as a raw material for photosynthesis. So you are advised you should always plant trees. You cut one tree as the policy of the government. You cut one tree, you plant more trees, 2 trees or more to reduce the emission of carbon dioxide or the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Is it clear? Good. That is the other side of carbon. So we're looking at carbonates because we said among the inorganic compounds of carbon, there is carbon dioxide and carbon. There are oxides, there are carbonates, there are hydrogen carbonates. So we have finished looking at the oxides of carbon, which is carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. So we are looking at carbonates and the hydrogen carbonates. All right? So how is carbonate formed? So the carbonate is a salt. Carbonate is a salt, all right? Carbonate is a salt, which is formed when hydrogen atom of carbonic acid is replaced by a metal or an ammonia. This is what happens. So you know what we call carbonic acid, carbonic acid. with an equation of H2CO3. All right? So when hydrogen of carbonic acid is replaced by either amato or ammonium, this is ammonium, we form carbonate, metal carbonates or ammonium carbonates. For example, this hydrogen can be removed. We put there sodium. We remember sodium is a metal. Sodium carbonate can be calcium carbonate, etc. So you get any metal, you replace it with, within here, you get a metal carbonate. All right? So it can be ammonium carbonate now. So you, instead of now putting a metal, you put in ammonia. You remove hydrogen, you put in ammonia. So ammonia, ammonium carbonate. All right? These carbonates can be formed by removing the hydrogen of carbonic acid and replace it by a metal or ammonia. So you put any metal you want and remove the hydrogen of carbonic acid. All right? So then what we form is a salt. These are salts. They are salts. All right? That's how we form metal or metallic carbonates. So we have examples of potassium carbonate, we have examples of sodium carbonate, we have examples of copper carbonate, have zinc carbonate, magnesium carbonate, and many other carbonates. As you remove the metal, the hydrogen of a carbonic acid and replace it with any metal. Good. On the other hand, hydrogen carbonate are formed when you can call it hydrogen carbonate or bicarbonates. They are formed when hydrogen of carbonic acid is partially replaced by a metal, partially replaced, or what we call partial replacement. So we have this, right? Have this carbonic acid. There is partial, half, it's like half of this is removed and replaced by a metal. So for example, you remain with only one hydrogen and the whole of this, and then replace it with a metal. So this is sodium hydrogen carbonate. Can be calcium hydrogen carbonate. So you only remove, all right? You only remove half of this. Partial replacement, in other words. We call it partial replacement. This is the word. This is partial replacement. So one hydrogen is removed, then you remain with one, then you add a metal. That hydrogen that is being removed is replaced by a metal. So you get what we call hydrogen carbonate metals. So we have examples of sodium hydrogen carbonate, potassium hydrogen carbonate, mentioned but a few. So just remove half of the hydrogen, because we have two hydrogens, one remains, then put in a metal. All right? Good. That's how these carbonates and hydrogen carbonates are formed. Do you have any question there? No question. Good. So as I was saying in the introduction, we have been looking at inorganic compounds of carbon, the inorganic compounds of carbon. Those are substances or compounds that contains carbon, or carbon in combined forms. So we said, like a fresh back, we said carbon has around 3 kinds of, or exist in a combined form like in 3 ways. Those are oxides of carbon, carbonates, and hydrogen carbonates. So we talked of the oxides of carbon being, can you remind us? Yeah, carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. We have talked of how carbon monoxide is formed. We said carbon monoxide is formed when there is what we call incomplete combustion of carbon, or charcoal. So when we talk of charcoal, remember that is carbon, because charcoal is a form of carbon, the amorphous form of carbon, as we had started, introduced the lesson earlier in the previous lessons. All right? So, how is carbon dioxide formed? Remember we said carbon dioxide is formed when there is what we call complete combustion of carbon. That's when carbon reacts in excess oxygen, in excess air. All right? Those are the two. We have even looked at them, their physical properties. We have even looked at some of the equations. Now, carbonates and hydrogen carbonates. We have said that carbonates are formed when the whole of hydrogen of carbonic acid, the whole of hydrogen of carbonic acid is removed and replaced by either a metal or ammonium. So for hydrogen carbonates, we have said hydrogen carbonates are formed when part of hydrogen of carbonic acid is removed and replaced by a metal. I've got examples like, I've talked of examples like sodium hydrogen carbonate, potassium hydrogen carbonate, and other hydrogen carbonate where you just remove the carbonate, the hydrogen, one hydrogen of, part of the hydrogen of carbonic acid and replace it by a metal. All right? Good. So this is the work that you're supposed to do in your free time. So to look at it together, the exercise, look on the slide. This is the exercise that you're going to look to work upon when you reach in your free time. The first question is, carbon monoxide is toxic. Explain. Remember, I told you that when carbon monoxide is formed and you happen to inhale, to breathe in carbon monoxide, it is very dangerous. It is a very toxic gas. Why? You remember of the hemoglobin reacting with carbon dioxide to form carboxyhemoglobin, which will block the transportation of oxygen, and finally an individual may suffocate, or when it becomes too much, an individual dies. So that is some of the points you have to bring out, trying to explain why carbon monoxide is a toxic gas. All right? So what is global warming? Number 2, what is global warming? I mentioned this. We mentioned of what we call greenhouse gases, leading to greenhouse effect, leading to global warming. That is climate change. All right? So that accumulation of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, distracting the ozone layer, a lot of temperature hitting the Earth's surface, too much heat or too much temperature, which leads to climate changes. That is global warming. So try to explain in that context. So what causes that? What causes global warming? All right? So the last question is, what steps should be taken to minimize the effects of global warming. So we had seen some of the causes of global warming, all right? So what steps the government or individuals should take to minimize the effects of global warming? So those are the questions, just 2 questions, but try to do them in details, explain them the way I've explained them together here, and then after we shall collect them together in the next lesson. Right? Hope you don't have any question there. If you have, you may ask. Any question? No question. So try to do those 2 numbers in your free time and bring them for marking. All right? So thank you so much for your good attention. Let's meet in the next lesson next time. Bye.